Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second and final day of the inaugural Stanford Existential Risks Conference. As mentioned in our earlier email, we highly recommend prioritizing setting up meetings with other attendees over the course of the day. Our first session for the day is with Mutale Nkonde on current AI misalignment and potential long-term implications. I'm Habiba Islam, and I'll be your MC for this session. Mutale will be giving us a short talk, and then there'll be time for audience questions. So for those of you watching, please do start submitting your questions. On the right side panel of the Swapcard platform, you can submit and upvote questions during the session. Also, please do share your thoughts on the live discussion board. But without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce Mutale. Mutale Nkonde is the founding CEO of AI for the People, a nonprofit communications agency. Prior to this, Nkonde worked in AI governance. During that time, she was part of the team that introduced the Algorithmic and Deepfakes Algorithmic Acts, as well as the No Biometric Barriers to Housing Act to the US House of Representatives. She started her career as a broadcast journalist and produced documentaries for the BBC, CNN, and ABC. She now also writes widely on race and technology, as well as speaking at conferences around the world. Thank you for joining us, Mutale.
Thank you so much, Habiba, and it's my pleasure to be here. So I'm going to go right into my presentation, if I could just have my slides. And over the next 8 minutes, just give you the lay of the land here. So I grew up in the UK, moved to the US around 15 years ago and have been living in New York City. And what you're seeing in front of you is a robot dog that is being used by the New York Police Department. And we're being told that this dog is just being used in the same way as live dogs would be, to go into difficult scenes and to help with investigation. However, there is an issue. The dog, much like driverless cars, operates using sensors to look at the crime scene and is fed in its training of what a crime scene is and what danger means, is fed information from prior crime scenes. So we're thinking about computer vision, we're thinking about audio for folks that use Clubhouse, if you think about how they're using audio technology, as well as facial recognition. And we know that crime is a heavily racialized area in the United States. And so for people like me that look at the racialized impact of AI development, this is extremely scary for us, and for major reasons. So dogs in the United States have always been used against Black populations as a crime fighting tool. So for them to even use this form really goes back to an era of policing that was extremely anti-Black. And then on top of that, the history of policing in the United States actually comes from slave catching laws, where there were Black codes in place that meant if you were a Black person by yourself without a white person anywhere in the United States, you could be captured by the then police and taken into custody, which is exactly what we're seeing today. However, post the murder of George Floyd, we have now seen a multiracial coalition coalescing behind this idea that Black Lives Matter and this critical evaluation of not just police, but technological policing. So I'm coming to you really to talk more about a report I worked on in 2019 that was really designed to help engineers, other people working in ML fields, to really think about how can we bring this racial awareness to the design, deployment, and governance of this system. And it has three elements: cognitive, emotionally, and our action plan. So one of the things that we ask in the context of this framework is, cognitively, AI systems are being deployed in ways that uphold white supremacy. So just like the robot dog is much like the dogs used in the civil rights movement and being used by forces who within the antebellum South and slavery were used to incriminate Black people. We're seeing that, but we're now seeing it encoded into systems. Emotionally, the research and development community are not facing this. What they will say is these are unintended consequences. The dog is just there to clear a crime scene. We don't have mission creep, whereas we know that license plate readers, when they were introduced in the US context, were for parking tickets. And then with the Trump administration, became one of the ways that people were funneled into the deportation pipeline, because that data that was gathered was then cross-referenced against immigration records, which was not the intended purpose. But race was never a conversation because tech was seen to be neutral. And then lastly, action plans. So one of the things I would say as somebody who wants racially literate futures within AI and ML fields is that those who are developing these systems have to look at the race canon, the African-American canon, and other decolonized canons that center the stories and perspectives of not just Black, but other marginalized groups to inform development. And that's the future that we're trying to create. Unfortunately, that's not the presence that we're in. This is Dr. Timnit Gebru, who has a PhD from Stanford University and was recently, she would say, fired. Google say another story. I err on the side of firing for doing this type of research. She's actually one of the co-authors on the paper that found facial recognition does not recognize Black faces. Her partner, Michelle Mitchell, who also was over the ethical AI team at Google, was later fired. So Timnit went in December. Michelle went, I believe, at the end of February, beginning of March. But that left really a void for people who were really looking at this idea of racial literacy within technology. And Timnit, who's a friend, said that she actually used my framework in a training and got fired from Google. So before you run out and tell people not to be racist within some of these company settings, know that it could get you fired. So I did a study in 2019 and found that 94% of the Google researchers in their Google Brain team were white and Han Chinese men. There were other Asian people in that mix, but Han Chinese was the dominant group. So that makes you think not only is this hostile environment, and it's not just Google, it's just Google's got the worst press at the moment, but you've also got this homogenistic company setting that doesn't enable critical computer scientists to have even the power to have these conversations. And this really is taking us back to what I would consider the South during Jim Crow, where there were places that white people could go. There was agency given to white people that was not offered to Blacks. But like this man in the screen, we don't care. We are going to defy those, and we're going to create the type of industry that we want to see. Because the truth of it is, the robot dog you saw on the first slide isn't always just going to be used to scope out crime scenes. This is an example of the same model of dog, but you'll see here that a gun has been mounted on its back with a sensor. This was used in an artistic setting. Sorry, I'm in the noisiest place on earth. This was used in an artistic setting and used to make a point. But given the crisis of gun violence in the United States, the crisis of the killing of Black and brown bodies at the hands of police, we need to ask ourselves, is the future that we're preparing ourselves for one in which the robot dog will become armed? And I would argue that not only is that what we're preparing ourselves for, but if we don't intervene now, that's the present that we're in. So thank you so much, and I look forward to questions.
Thank you, Mutale. We'll dive straight into questions now. Just first, to set the context, could you tell us a bit about your organization, AI for the People? What is it, and why did you set the organization up?
Yes, so AI for the People is a communications firm. I've been a journalist for the last 20 years. So starting at the BBC in the early 2000s in the news and documentary unit. And within that role was always telling stories about science, race, and society broadly. This was prior to my work in technology that came about 10 years later when I worked opposite Google's external affairs department. And the job there was very much like the job I have now. We were taking a company that based its products on science. And we were really going in and talking to policymakers and other stakeholders about the benefit this would be for New York City. But that benefit never had any critical analysis about the way these systems that we were developing would impact negatively racialized groups like Black people. And so AI for the People is really an answer to that, in the sense that we create media content, film, other types of media content that really explain what the technology does. And then we hopefully will use that so that people can build power towards deciding, do you want an armed robot dog in your environment, which is incidentally a Black Mirror storyline. So yes, there's that too.
It's a horrifying episode, but very gripping. So thanks for explaining what AI for the People does. I noticed you've recently been working with Amnesty International on a campaign. Could you tell us a bit more about that particular project?
Yes, so Amnesty International are doing this amazing global campaign called Ban the Scam. And what they want to do is push to change norms around how facial recognition is used, or in their case, they don't want to use it, across 4 cities in the globe, New York City being one. And so as a communications firm, we came in and co-produced a 5-minute film that were just case studies. There was a housing case study where facial recognition was replacing keys, as well as a criminal justice case study. And we used that 5-minute film to go and engage community groups and legislators and organizers who are working on other issues, but they don't have a technological analysis. And we're so proud that it's come out around the time Coded Bias is on Netflix, because we feel like it's like a very nice companion for people who don't have 2 hours to really get into a documentary, but maybe 5 minutes to connect with our characters.
Mm-hmm. Great. And just to talk about the kinds of issues that you're concerned about, do you have a sense of what kind of timescales you're worried about some of these things coming to fruition in, around the sort of the facial scans and the sort of robot dogs, things like that?
Yeah, so we have 2 bodies of work. One's called Race Technology in the Black Body, which are biometrics. And all of those things are happening in real time, right? The robot dog was used here in New York City last week. Mm-hmm. It didn't have a gun on it, but it's part of a police force. It could have a gun on it. Very soon. We also do a body of work that looks at information integrity, so mis and disinformation, specifically targeted to Black groups. And we're in active conversations with Twitter, because we built a data set and did some analysis around the US election. And I also sit on the TikTok Content Advisory Board. So really making sure that those algorithms are not shadow banning people or not creating any type of racial harm. These are all ongoing live issues, but our narrative change cycle, because we're very interested in narrative change, is a 5-year cycle. So we try to move slowly and we try to build community very intentionally.
Mm-hmm. And do you have a sense of how the work that you're doing connects to sort of concerns that people might have over even longer timescales, sort of like how AI might develop over the coming multiple decades?
Yeah, so we're already seeing the beginning of companies like IBM developing these social media campaigns around quantum computing and how safe it is and how it's going to, just be great. And as a science communicator and as somebody that had done very similar work for another company, I know that that's not the whole story. So we're already, even in our own work, beginning to look at quantum, beginning to look at the applications, because the technologies are often agnostic, but it's the way that they're deployed and the governance or lack thereof that create real harm for communities. So kind of getting in front of that enables us to introduce that to the lexicon, because many of our communities don't even know about AI. Like they just think it's like terrible magic.
Mm. Just switching over to some audience questions now that we've had through Swapcard. People are you talked a bit in your talk about what's been happening at Google and Google's AI ethics team. So I'm curious how optimistic you are about how big tech companies are going to respond to this. And in particular, someone's asked, how do we safeguard against this kind of AI misalignment, given that most of the actors developing AI seem hesitant to acknowledge it's a problem at all?
I think we need to regulate them, and I think we need to break them up. We have to remember that these tech companies are beholden to their shareholders. Mm-hmm. So firing Timnit, firing Michelle, in another iteration of the talk, which would be longer, mm-hmm. I actually go through all the people that have been fired across all the various departments. Mm-hmm. That's not going to change, but what we can do is change market conditions. So we need to have strong regulation that isn't written by the companies, as well as social movements that integrate these concerns. And that's where I think AI for the people really comes in, because we're saying if you're a housing activist, you should care about biometrics. If you're a police activist, a reformer, abolitionist, you should care about this. If you are somebody that's looking at fair food systems, and in giving that overall analysis, because our whole world is now mediated by these systems, we will build the type of power that gets to, on my very first slide, this idea of white people in the Midwest of America saying defund the police and Black Lives Matter. Like, that's ridiculous. That's something I would never have envisioned, but it happened, and it's happening again right now.
Mm-hmm. That's very, very optimistic take on things. I'm curious if you're hoping that a lot of this pressure is going to come via governments acting on this then and putting in place the regulation. How do you have a view on how you're sort of how you perceive the US government and their position on AI at the moment, and how optimistic are you that they will actually respond as is needed?
I'm famously optimistic, but the level of literacy is really low. Mm-hmm. And so we have to do so much education, because the other side are creating the future. They're creating the future. They're creating the markets. They're setting terms. And so I'm hoping that, civil society can come in and do that. There've been some really optimistic hires by the Biden administration looking at these issues. Not everybody has got through confirmation. And so I see the willingness, but I think it's going to be sustained pressure from sustained administrations to make that change.
Mm-hmm. We've had a couple of questions, or people are interested in some of the technical challenges here. So one question is, how can these machine learning giants, so for example, Google, DeepMind, OpenAI, how can they select the material to learn or institutionalize positive systems that would actually consider all individuals across races, nations, species, and generations? So, so again, sorry?
I don't think they can, because if you're using historic data, then are we going back to our past and being anti-racist, abolitionist, gender affirming humans? Mm-hmm. I don't think that they can. I think that we have to ask another question, which is more pressing for me. Do we need to have AI systems govern this particular instance? Mm-hmm. And another question on top of that is, if we are going to, if we're going to be in violation of human or civil rights of individuals, should we even be using these systems on humans? So there is an experiment in Canada where they're using facial recognition technology to help characterize their wild bear population. Mm-hmm. And I was like, bear recognition, great. Bears have no human rights. knock yourself out. In fact, go into the ocean, go to the coral reef, because we are in an economic crisis, right? We're in an environmental crisis right now. And some of these technologies could be used to classify. That's what they do. They put things in categories. Should we even be using them as predictive tools? Because last time I looked, the great potential of being a human being is that we have the capacity to change. But if you put in systems, specifically in the criminal justice context, where you're predicting whether this person will be criminalized until the end of their natural life, I think that's completely unethical. And we should be looking we should be looking at reform. We shouldn't even be using those types of tools within that environment.
Mm-hmm. We've had one question from an audience which is interested to dig into that piece a little bit more. So, for example, we could rely on AI systems, or we could rely on human judgment here. And someone has asked, are AI systems with their own biases picked up from these historic data sets actually more dangerous than human decision makers who also have those biases? And so this person has pointed out that one advantage of AI could be that the biases can be more easily identified and then fixed more comprehensively than if it was human decision makers.
Well, it depends who's the person identifying, because, almost 100% of the white computer scientists, when we were doing racial literacy in tech, said that there was no racism. So they wouldn't even look for it in the first place. They were like, it was like the UK race report, where they were like, racist to us? No. And we were like, actually, you are actual colonizers. You are actual colonizers. No, stop it. And so I would argue that that it really depends, the research question that you ask, one, to whether that would even be surfaced. And the great thing about humans is that they can change. AI systems do not have the capacity to take on social context, to change, to move their position, to go from police affirming to abolition. That's not what they're designed for. AI systems are designed to pick out patterns based on historic patterns and make future predictions. And I just think we should never, as scientists, put ourselves in a situation where we're predicting the future. We should be we should be in the business of thinking that human beings and the human race can only get better if given the chance and if given new information. And so AI is incompetent at that particular type of reasoning.
Mm-hmm. As you know, this conference is around the concept of existential risks, these most extreme catastrophes that might befall the human species of the planet. And you might consider sort of climate change or nuclear war in that category. And a lot of people consider sort of a lot of the development of maybe very advanced AI to fall in this kind of category. Someone has asked that they find some resistance amongst the community, the existential risk community, to care more than the average person, to care about sort of race and class issues. And they're interested to hear you speak a bit more about how one might be able to frame social justice issues in ways that might help persuade people who are focused on these biggest catastrophic existential risks.
So two things, but climate crisis impacts people, and it's not going to impact people equally. The Black people and poor people are going to be the most impacted and first, and actually are. Just go to a council estate and find out who has asthma, and then go to the Cotswolds and find out who has asthma. So that's one. Two, the thing that I would say, and I've been saying this even when I did policy work, that anti-Black racism is a national security threat. And when I first started saying that in 2017, people were like, oh my God, she's just always talking about racism. It's totally over. And now she's just exaggerating. And then January 6, 2020 happened at the US Capitol, and a mob of white supremacists tried to interrupt the vote. And as I said, one body of our work looks at algorithmic driven recommendation systems and what that does to our democracy. And I was able to hand a case study that said, in this case, race-based discourse delivered through algorithms radicalized enough people that they went to the US Capitol to behead a sitting vice president. this, I said to you, anti-Black racism is a national security risk. But what I should have also have said is so is white supremacy. So all of these other systems, nuclear war, are almost always about advancing the white supremacist project through the lens of misogyny, as is climate denial, has been very much about individualistic, rugged, individualistic, male-centered, white-centered narratives of how we should be on this earth. We shouldn't think about future generations. We shouldn't think about community. We should only think about ourselves, because we go, we conquer, we colonize, and that's unacceptable. And so unless you're bringing in this race-class analysis and reminding this community that these threats are going to be visited upon, these threats are going to be visited upon human beings, then I don't feel that they're really truly understanding the magnitude of those issues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if I can just add to that, I think that point around not considering the interests of future generations, I think is a really important piece here, because I think there's a lot of for those who come from an existential risk, or in the existential risk community, and are caring about some of these catastrophic risks, there's a lot of similarities in thinking about speaking up for underrepresented folks, or people who don't have a position of power in the current socio-political environment. And there are disadvantaged groups nowadays who I think are in that category. And also I think people in the future who don't have a say at all are also in this category of being not considered in the decision making at the highest level at the moment. And so I think that can also be like an interesting point of an in for people who are interested in sort of both things. I just want to also pick up on, there have been a few questions in the chat about the identity of people carrying out this kind of research. So just one quick point of clarification. In your slides, you mentioned a 94% figure for Google Brain. Was that figure only white individuals, if that also included Han Chinese?
It included Han Chinese, but it was overwhelmingly white. So even in that data set, the second most, so there were two other groups that were in that 94%, Han Chinese, and then Indian, but Tamil Brahmin. So it wasn't even just like India, oh, look at all these people from India. It was Tamil Brahmin folks who then had a huge lawsuit against them in California because they weren't allowing Dalit colleagues to get. I mean, it's a different Zoom, but it was a problem. It was a lot of dominant group folk. Let's just say that.
I think, yes, I guess that's a whole other topic of discussion. And unfortunately, that is all the time that we have for in today's session. But thank you so much, Mutale, for your time today.